Hey guys, so today we are going to talk about backend and frontend and which one is trickier. So let's get into it. Now, this is, as you may expect, one of those political bombshells type of videos where I stick my neck out, express some opinions on a highly controversial area, and I do so with the utmost respect for everybody. And I actually, honestly, I think that I might be in a unique position here. Well, not unique, but a little bit of a unique position at least, because I have spent the same amount of time virtually on the front end as I have on the server side or the back end. Which means that if I now play my cards correctly, I will get a little bit less hatred from everybody who's going to flame me because they're on the other side of the fence. Basically because I can actually objectively say what I've found to be true about these two fields of expertise within programming. So let's get into it. Before we can even start to approach this, we have to kind of punch a hole or something of that nature on this idea that there is such a thing that there's a measurable way to determine how difficult something is in the context of this, right? There's absolutely subjective ways of saying that something is easier than something else. For example, it's easy for me to say that understanding how a variable works is easier than to understand how an AI algorithm works. I think that we can all agree on that, right? But the question that which one is easier or trickier or so forth when it comes to server side and backend and frontend is more asked because there is this rivalry, and you may not know this, but there is this really retarded, not that word, this really stupid, let's call it stupid because it's stupid, it's not retarded, it's stupid. This stupid thing that programmers do, and they do it all the time. They have this need to, I suppose it has to do with their own personal, highly subjective opinions on what's more tricky and what's more valuable, basically, because I see this quite often. This happens. And I mean, I've been on every side of the spectrum. I've been on the back end and had people basically tell me that the backend's the language that I work in. Oh, it's not good enough, and therefore I'm not as valuable as they are. And I've been a front-end developer being mocked by both back-end developers who say that my job what I do isn't really all that tricky. And I've also been told by designers that, hey, I'm a developer, I don't understand how tricky it is to be a designer, because developers, we just implement the thing, but the designer has to do all these other complicated things. There's all kinds of people that have this attitude towards everything in life. They do everything they can to basically justify to themselves that they are, or convince themselves that, hey, they are good and somebody else. And they do this by virtually making somebody else feel bad, or making something, lowering the value of something else, because that makes them all content and satisfied in the thought that what they do is the thing that is more valuable. That's usually how it goes. So how does that affect somebody who's been doing both and loves programming in all its forms? Because I actually do. I honestly do. I've been asked so many times, even when I was in school, my teachers asked me what my focus would be. They asked, so would you say that you're more a front-end guy or a back-end guy? And I said, I can't answer that. They kind of just looked at me and said, well, what do you mean? Of course you have a preference. And I said, no, to me it's just a problem to be solved. To me it doesn't matter if it's a front-end issue or if it's a back-end issue. It's completely pointless to even ask that question of me, because I get as excited about creating a really powerful, reusable UI component as I get excited about declaring a really nice, well-tested service with a nice interface on the server. It's the same thing with complex problems. There are extremely complicated problems on the front end as there are complicated problems on the back end. So to me, It's not about what type of problem it is. It's just a problem to be solved. That's how I look at it. And if we now objectively try to distinguish between front-end and back-end, what's more difficult, I want to say first and foremost what problems I find to be the most common issues on both sides. So let's start there, okay? Good. So for a back-end developer, the most common problems, at least from my perspective, it kind of depends on the scale or the size of the company. At small scale, it's very tricky for a backend developer to kind of foresee the ways that the system can change. It's actually why I argue that a service-oriented architecture at the backend level is actually very beneficial, because it's a very easy, scalable thing that you can do that is not perfect by any means, but it gets you to a point very quickly in this beginning of the project to a point where you can actually produce software very rapidly, and it scales fairly well, even though it's very tricky. Well, it's not tricky, but it's easier to make that a scalable thing than most other architectures that I've seen. It's actually very often that I see that the decisions that are being made on the back end in the beginning of the project causes the fundamental issue that you get later. And the later issue that you get as a backend developer is that you have spaghetti code. Highly complicated, very tricky or flaky spaghetti code that you can't really maintain. That's a really, really tricky issue for a backend developer. And the other issues that I see for a backend developer when things get up to this usually happens when you get to a little bit of scale, is performance issues. You have things as load time, you have memory issues, CPU issues, all these different things that factor into the backend system. So for a backend developer, I would say that the trickiest challenge is to virtually maintain the code base in such a way that you can add more people to the project and you don't get spaghetti code. Now that is absolutely it's a very tricky problem, but for the most part the rest of it is fairly straightforward. You have a lot of things going for you on the back end, I think, and I enjoy it quite a bit to work in that manner. So to me, backend's biggest, as I said, challenges are code consistency, scalability, maintainable code, all that good stuff. Okay, so what about the front end? What are the issues that you face there? Well, for the front end, it depends on your definition of front end. I'm just going to stick to the browser, to the web interfaces now, because Android and iOS is a little bit different, but just bear with me. So a front-end developer, it used to be the case that one of your major issues was, of course, browser compatibility, trying to figure out what works in what browser and so forth. And to a point that is still true. It's not such an issue these days, I would say. It's getting much better, and I think what's coming up is going to solve a lot of these issues for us. I've never seen such cooperation between the browser vendors as I see these days. So, apart from that, I would say that the biggest issue for front-end is very similar to the biggest issue that the back-end developers have, with one major difference, and this is why I think that it's a very underestimated thing. You see, front-end code or JavaScript code decays faster in general, that's from my experience, than server-side code. In general, it's much easier for you to mess up the front-end code than it is to mess up the back-end code. I'm not saying that one is better. Once again, I'm not saying one is trickier than the other, but I'm just saying that it's very easy for you to mess up JavaScript. So that's something that you actually have on both the server side and the front end. So apart from that, I would like to ask a more fundamental question. What is it that makes the front end code get so messy? Because I don't accept that there are these programmers who will say to you that, it's just because the front end developers aren't real developers, or they will tell you that, they're inexperienced, or that JavaScript is a shitty language and nobody can make it work. All this is bullshit. It's bullshit right through and through. And because there are so many projects that are so much higher quality than anything that these people who are naysayers have ever worked on, or at least rivaling the size. I mean, let's be honest here, guys, React and all these other open source frameworks, I don't care how much you hate JavaScript. Let's just admit that it's possible to make good JavaScript projects. So what I argue is happening on the front end, which is something that the server side doesn't actually have to face, or the backend doesn't have to face, is that since you are working at the UI level, you find yourself very often having an issue with standardizing your visual components. One of the biggest issues, and I think that this is why this happens so quickly, is because very often when you develop things, you get to make one-off solutions for every single thing you do. It's only in recent time when we've started moving over to using visual components and try to create these reusable Lego blocks of UI components that you can plug in, and the designers are doing this as well. So, because we have realized that this has been an issue for a long time. And that's something that the server side does. You think of it in terms of this: if every solution, just conceptually, if every solution is a one-off solution, it becomes very tricky to maintain some type of consistency in the code base, and everything becomes a big, like you have all these different components that are similar, but they're a little bit different. They could have been the same thing, and exactly all these issues starts piling up on you very quickly, at least from my experience. And that's what I think is the trickiest part with front-end development, with one more thing to consider. And this is once again a scaling issue. So if I would go as far as saying that the biggest issue for server-side or backend is load, to create a system that can manage really high intensity and a lot of load basically. For the front end, the biggest issue is very similar to that. It's load. It's about keeping down your assets, keeping down the size of the stuff that you're sending to the client, and making your web page feel performant. That's the biggest scaling issue I think that frontend has. And if you've been paying attention, what did I actually say? I said that the biggest issue for backend developers is to keep a nice code base over time. I said that for a front-end developer, the biggest problem is to maintain the code base over time. And then I said that the biggest issue for the backend developers when they get to scale is load, and the same thing is true for front-end. See, this is why I'm not a front-end developer and I'm not a back-end developer. I'm just a guy who really likes programming, and I don't care where I work. Have a great day.